makes a sound scary? Well, I was curious about this, so I built an instrument specifically designed for horror music, and then I proceeded to rescore the entirety of the 1922 horror classic Nosferatu in order to figure that out.
That was a small clip from Levi McLean. Levi is a content creator that specializes in math, science, and music, also audio engineering, and a little bit of neuroscience. Levi will be joining us in just a bit to talk about the neuroscience of audio engineering, and then later we're going to talk about what that might mean for artificial intelligence. This is the Breaking Math Podcast, and I'm your host, Gabriel Hesch. Our mission is to bring you the absolute best in interdisciplinary science communication. And what that means is that we'll have guests on in different fields, things like neuroscience and machine learning and computer science who will come together and talk about where their fields overlap. We might have folks who are studying biology come together with chemists and material science, and we'll all talk about how these fields come together in us defining what it means to be human. It is, it's meant to be a fascinating podcast and give you a lot to think about, as well as a more well-rounded view of all the sciences as a whole. I am thrilled to have Levi here. I found him on social media, and I reached out to him, and he agreed to come on. Thank you for joining us, Levi.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Levi, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I'm ecstatic to have you on. I can't believe you're here because I literally just saw your content and said, hey, have you ever thought about artificial intelligence applications to this? And you responded. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. It's always great to talk about things just outside of my own discipline. So thanks for reaching out.
Oh, absolutely. So you have a whole lot of content. I watched almost all of it, and I tried my best to reduce it into something that we could talk about in this one episode. It's a long outline, so who knows? We may have to do this in a two-parter, but that's okay. And for our listeners, I always talk about this book. I actually got Levi a copy of this book. I think you ended up buying it yourself. I owe you for that, but next time, right? I'll buy you a few drinks. This is the book that we kind of based the discussion on, which is A Brief History of Intelligence by Max Bennett, where in this case we will zero in on audio engineering. I have a quick, awesome story that illustrates the power of audio engineering and knowledge in that area. As I mentioned earlier, I had many conversations with Levi about the science of audio engineering and machine intelligence. And what I loved is that we kept asking each other questions back and forth and had an opportunity to share our knowledge. I was on the phone with Levi when I was driving to this studio, and I was walking in. I said, hey, Levi, I'm in studio now. And Levi said, I know. And I said, how? What? I thought, are you following me or something, or are you tracking me or something? It left me really weirded out. And basically, Levi explained, and I'll let him take over this point in a second, he basically explained that the changes in my own voice from when I was in the car to when I was walking on the street to when I walked into the studio, he could tell absolutely just based on the echoes and what he heard in the sound itself. That freaked me out. Levi, can you tell us a little bit about that? What was it like hearing me?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it's probably something that it seems like a superpower, but it's really not. I think most audio engineers end up developing something like this because we're sitting around and we're mixing sounds all day, and we're in studio, so we get really accustomed to listening to the room of a sound because that changes so much of the sound of the instruments that we play. Singing in a cathedral is going to sound vastly different than singing in a little bedroom closet. And so we kind of developed this keen ear for being able to hear things about the room, certain qualities like I can tell, generally speaking, about how large a room is, just with my eyes closed. If I walk into it, and then also with that, we can kind of be able to discern certain sounds of the material of the walls. What is the structure that we're in made out of, and it's this really interesting and kind of cool things that humans can do that I don't think we utilize very often. But in talking to you, I immediately thought of the applications of how can we implement something like this into artificial intelligence. So, like, would it be possible to take like a microphone, put it in the middle of the room, train it on a bunch of different rooms, and then from the ambient sound of that room, could a computer, could an artificial intelligence, machine learning system be able to identify qualities about that room? I think that's a really really neat thing that I don't think has been explored yet.
That is absolutely incredible, and I think you're right. And that's it's funny because these conversations about how you can garner or how you can gather information about your surroundings forces us to realize there's so much that we don't know, and that we don't know that we don't know. Pardon that a bit of an awkward phrase here, but that's absolutely true. You spoke of audio engineers who learned that skill over time, and suddenly it just became aware that your brain could pick up patterns in these things, and you learn to associate them, and with that you suddenly have this ability to know information about your surroundings. It sends a bit of chills down my spine, I'm not going to lie, but at the same time it's absolutely amazing. Now,
Yeah.
without further ado, I'd like to actually deep dive into your talk on fear. That was the video that we opened up with. And can you tell us a little bit about, tell us the story of why you decided to focus on fear? What was the process like when you put that script together, both in terms of your research and just your inspiration? And we saw you completely destroy a violin. Do you feel sorry about that at all?
Not at all. The violin had it coming. So I originally started this idea when I was watching the 1920s horror film Nosferatu, which is it's like a knockoff Dracula film from the 20s. It's a silent film, and I noticed that something interesting about it, which is that I didn't find it scary whatsoever, and all the people I was watching with also was like, this is just kind of boring, honestly. And then I was kind of doing some research into it, and then reading a little bit about horror film history, and I came to understand that the original soundtrack for the Nosferatu film was actually lost because I guess the widow of Bram Stoker, who was the original author of the Dracula films, sued um, uh, uh, the director for Nosferatu, and there was a court order to like destroy all the movies, and so basically all the copies got burned, and the original soundtrack was lost. I thought that was a really interesting opportunity to explore this idea of scary sounds in a way where I can see if I can make Nosferatu scary just through sound, and also kind of have a chance to rescore a really iconic movie.
My gosh, that's incredible. That's cool. So that video has a lot of neuroscience that you discuss, and actually, I watched the entire video, and I filled up, I want to say, 6 pages of a notebook with every term and every concept that you put in it. As you mentioned, some specific mathematical concepts. I'd like to bring those up here right now. So you talk a lot about what do humans find that is pleasing and calm, and what do they find that is frightening or disturbing, or things that would cause our nervous system to react? Is there a mathematical description of that kind of thing?
Yeah. So the way I like to approach it is, most topics in psychoacoustics are quite complex because sound is so multidimensional. So there's different ways to describe a sound, and kind of all of it comes together in its entirety to describe a sound as a whole. So with that video and that in this project, I was trying to figure out more so like, what is there something specific? Is there any one dimension of those of the quality of the sound that contributes more so to something being frightening than anything else? And what I came to understand is specifically in certain types of fear, mainly uh, quick fear. So there's quick fear and there's slow fear. I'll discuss quick fear. Maybe we can jump on the slow fear a little bit later. One of the qualities in the anatomy of a sound, if you will, is called roughness. And now, roughness is basically a description of how quickly a sound rises in volume and amplitude. And if it has a high degree of roughness, typically humans will assign that kind of sound to being scary. So in conversation, roughness will fluctuate, like 3 to 5 to maybe 10 times per second. And then in something like a human scream, it's much more. So like you're talking 30, 150 times per second or something like that. And so we can kind of start to classify certain sounds mathematically through that one dimension as scary or not scary. And so that's one part of the puzzle.
That's fascinating. One of the things that I wondered about, and I think you and I either talked a bit about or I wrote in the side notes on my notebook is, okay, so our ears work in a way, or rather our ears plus our brains and our central nervous system differentiate the frightening sound based on the hertz, or the amount of amplitude changes. And I think from the video you said the scream is literally between 30 and 150 hertz in a scream. It made me think about all the sounds that we hear in nature, or that any living thing would hear in nature, and how unique the scream is, and possibly how it evolved to be a unique signaling thing that there's danger. You know what I mean? Like it's just a very unique thing. And I ask this because with machine learning, learning learns certain things based on a reward function. And well, first of all, machines don't have a self-preservation instinct. Machines aren't worried about predators chasing it. So its reward functions are a little different. That said, whether it's machine learning or biological things, you learn things for a reason. And in the case of, say, Darwinian evolution, you learn things like the reward function is you get to keep living and produce offspring. And the punishment function, if you will, is obviously you get into in danger or die. So I don't mean to be morbid here, but that sort of explains the form and function of fear. I just found it interesting that we specifically evolved to hear this characteristic of sound, and it makes me think like, would we have identified something else as scary if the circumstances were different?
You bring up a couple interesting points there, which is that one, I think a lot of this understanding of what makes something sound scary, and maybe just fear in general, maybe that you could apply this out to encompass a wider range here, but specifically in talking about like fearful sounds, I think it comes down to anything that breaks with expectations. So in bioacoustics, this would be called a nonlinearity. So if you in sticking with the example of a human scream versus human talking, if you're in a room with a bunch of people and you're talking, and then someone screams in the back of the room, that breaks from expectation. You don't expect to hear that in a crowded room, and so everyone's attention is drawn towards it, right? So that's an example of a nonlinearity. It's essentially something that breaks from expectation.
In the video, I didn't even think of this. I didn't bring up a diagram. There's beautiful diagrams in your video. There is phenomenal pictures. And for that reason, maybe our listeners should just go watch your video so they can see your great diagrams. That said, there's a whole section on a fear short circuit that is based on when your brain or your ears and your nervous system hear a sound that it has identified as the trigger for a fear response. Can you walk us through the the fear short circuit process in our brains?
Yeah, sure. So it's essentially a 5 neuron acoustic startle circuit is what it's referred to. And again, this goes into the kind of fear that's immediate, the scream at the corner of the room, which articulates your attention towards it. So what's basically how it works is pressure wave, sound wave will hit your ear. And they'll go from your ventral. Sorry, I have a little note here. A ventral cochlear nucleus, and which encodes intensity and temporal information, so where the sound is coming from. It'll then go through your lateral lemniscus to your reticular pontine nucleus, and at this point, that sound has articulated your eye movement and has brought your attention to the direction of the scary sound. It then the sound wave then travels through spinal interneurons to your motor neurons, and at this point, you are fully aware of the threat and you have completely reacted. And what I think is interesting about this is that it's such a fast process, right? And it only takes about 10 milliseconds to like articulate your attention towards something that's fearful. And what's interesting, I think, is when you juxtapose that with visual information. If you look at something like maybe a scary bear, or someone coming at you with a knife, or something morbid like that, it's a much slower process, even though light travels faster than sound. It's very interesting because you'll see the threat, and then your brain has to go through a decoding process to be able to recognize that it's a threat. Remember that, like, oh yeah, bears are scary, we should avoid them, and then your brain has to decode all this information to make you aware and present of the threat. It's because the visual process is a chemical one. There's a chemical conversion that has to happen with light, whereas the 5 neuron acoustic startle circuit is a very quick process. It happens immediately because it's a mechanical process, and it only has to go through 5 synapses. So
Nice.
yeah.
Sorry, yeah. What I really enjoyed about this video is exactly you do a great job of breaking it down from, as you basically said earlier, the slow fear response and the fast fear response, and you broke it down systematically. As an engineer, I love this, because as an engineer, I think, oh, okay, as I'm seeing this, I see the process. I could literally code this myself if I wanted to. I could make my own robot from this if I want to. So all my engineers who are enjoying this episode, check out the video and think about how would you encode a fear response, if you had to for an assignment. Another bonus assignment, here I am assigning homework, right, is how would you train machine learning to do it? You'd have to identify a reward function that then identifies things to, shall we say, fear or avoid, or to follow and create criteria. I'm going to blaze through this part real quick because I just love all the detail here. So it basically says there's a fear response short circuit that is described in the video. It includes the ventricle cochlear nucleus, which encodes intensity and location to the origin of the sound. Look at that. That's the first point. I'll state it again. Ventricle cochlear nucleus, and the bits of information that it includes, I shouldn't say bits, the information that it encodes are intensity and location. So you have to have those two things first. But then the signal travels down, and it goes to a piece called the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lemniscus,
I told you guys. I took crazy notes while I was watching this video. And then it goes to a part called the reticular pontine nucleus, where the eye movement and the attention is coordinated. This is amazing. It makes me think about how much science was done on this process to where we literally boiled it down system by system. But further, it literally talks about how information from one sense is integrated with other senses, and decisions are made in this shortcut function. Shortcuts are interesting because when you have a shortcut of information, you can make a rapid response, but you also don't have the full processing and the full decision-making potential of the entire brain. That's another conversation altogether, but we're talking about fear here, so it makes sense.
The processing comes later, and to that point, that's one of the core things that I like to do whenever I'm explaining something or understanding is like breaking it down so it's replicatable.
Yes.
I think that's so important because for me it's like you can tell me some information, but I'm the kind of guy who's always like, but why? But but why? How? I want to be able to build this like it's Legos, and I think it's really useful to explain processes in the brain, whether they're audio or otherwise, in that way where it's like, oh, well, we have the ability to we have this idea of like, oh, this is what we think happens. It's 5 neurons that does this. Well, then you can actually replicate it and you can actually test it and then have a very fine grained understanding of certain processes in the brain.
I think you could not have explained it better, and I think that's what a lot of engineers are thinking about when you have should we say a satisfaction of your own understanding. And I remember in my own life there was a point where I realized that. I think I was inspired by Richard Feynman. Actually, I don't know how familiar you are with Feynman.
Yeah.
He has a story in his book, Surely You Must Be Joking, Mr. Feynman, where somebody just off the cuff asked him, he said, hey, when you take a strand of spaghetti and you bend the spaghetti, why does it always break in two places and not one place? And Feynman thought about it, and he could not let go of it. And just for his own satisfaction of understanding, he obsessed with that question for a long time until he had an answer. I can give you the spoiler if you want, or I can save that for your homework. What do you guys think?
No, I want to hear it.
Okay. So you can look up all kinds of stuff. You talk about when you add tension to a piece of spaghetti, where is the pressure going, and where is the instability in the spaghetti strand. I need to let you know real quick, full disclosure, I had this conversation with an engineering consultant of mine, so I need to confirm this. Originally, I was thinking that it had something to do with the mathematics of nodes, and I'm sure as a sound engineer, you know what nodes are. According to my boss, it was simply that if you put one end in a vise and you break the other end, or you bend the other end, it'll break at one point. But because you are applying pressure from from your two hands, that's 2 points where you're applying pressure. The energy is kind of similar to the nodes in the sense that there's two fracture points. Sorry, long conversation. I wonder, we just spent how long talking about that, and we were just obsessed with this problem. That's engineering for you. And that's also what I think is a human advantage, is that our striving for engineering isn't simply one explanation for a phenomenon. Human beings in our, I'll just go and say what we think of as our exceptionality. Maybe other creatures do this too, but our level of understanding that we strive for is that can we rebuild this phenomenon, and can we describe it with that amount of fidelity, that we can recreate it. That's why I made this show, in part because I want to do that with a lot of the unknowns in artificial intelligence. So yeah, we'll get onto that later. Now, once you have a systematic and kind of a scientific understanding for the fear response, you really know it very, very well, you can then apply your knowledge of a fear response to something really cool, like making a scary movie or a soundtrack, which is exactly what you did. I wanted to ask you about, some of the things that you went for specifically, like what sounds you chose, what you peppered in there, and what was your strategy in making a scary sound or scary music for this clip?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways you can go about it, and having this knowledge of inputting non-linearities basically gets you scary sounds. There's a lot of things you can do that with that as a composer, like so that involves some distorted sounds, and so if you distort sound, you're pushing up that quickness to get to a high amplitude, so that's the roughness quality that you're really taking advantage of. So I definitely use that, but also some like composition techniques, right? Because a non-linearity, if we think of it, if we take a step back and just think of it as breaking from expectation, we can do certain things with that. So that's where the idea with the breaking the violin and turning it into this Frankenstein instrument kind of came into play. Part of that is to play on the movie a little bit, because it's essentially that the early horror movies. You have Dracula, you have Frankenstein, the Mummy, and those kind of things. So it's a little bit of a harken back to that, but it's also I think plays into the soul of the music a little bit, because what is Dracula? What is Nosferatu at its core? Well, it's a perversion of beauty, right? Mm-hmm. So it's something that's deeply human, that's been twisted into some like villainous monster. So to do that to a physical instrument, I think plays on that pretty well. And what you can do then is break the instrument, rebuild it into something a little bit perverse.
You said in the video that when this movie first when it was first released, I think it was banned somewhere, right? Where was it banned?
I forget which country it was banned in, but it was yeah, it was banned in a country. There's a bunch of reviews. With these things, it's like, oh, it's a horror movie, so we assume that it's going to be scary. And so, like, a lot of what I do is, I usually don't trust my any of my intuitions at first glance. So one of the first things I did is I went back to see about reviews at the time to see, like, wait, was this? It's not scary to me now. Maybe it was never scary. So I need to double check that. So go back and check reviews and what people were saying at the time, and people thought it was very, very scary, which plays into what you're saying, because now I would say that most people would not find it as scary as maybe a modern horror movie. So you're right, the target does move, and that kind of plays into the idea that, like, fear is more than just the immediate quick fear of a jump scare sound. And that plays into the idea of this slow fear concept. So a lot of what we find scary changes over time, over generations, as we get used to certain conventions. Like the idea of a Dracula has been played out so many times in so many movies that you really need to up the game in the modern era in order to kind of reclass this idea of scariness.
Oh, and I just realized earlier you talked about the entire process of destroying that violin and making a Frankenstein instrument. We have that video as well. I want to put that video in before we go any further in the outline. Video.
I built an entire horror instrument in order to figure out what makes something sound scary. Now, if I asked a composer, they might say it has something to do with the timbre of the instrument in concert with certain compositional techniques. Appropriately placed dissonances, stinger chords, and things to do with tension and release. An acoustician, by contrast, might examine the anatomy of a scary sound and observe a high degree of roughness in their waveform. This is an acoustic property which refers to the rate at which the amplitude of a given sound changes. A property high in not just scary sounds, but also human screams. The neuroscientist might note that some types of fearful sounds are a purely mechanical process, oriented and actuated by a 5-neuron acoustic startle circuit embedded in our brains. And the psychologist? Well, they might discuss how our relationship with fear changes as we understand ourselves and the world around us better and better through the decades, implying that some fears are of our own making. I say it's a really complex question. Perhaps a full 30-minute deep dive into the complex realm of psychoacoustics is in order. Oh, hey, and look at that. That's exactly what I did. So if that's what you're interested in, go check out my video, What Makes the Sound Scary, over on my YouTube channel in the link in my bio. Hoping to get past 1,000 views on this one. That would be nice. So any support helps.
What I kind of want to do is get videos like yours in front of like students who are thinking of going to college for music theory, things like that. Also, a lot of people who are really interested in the science but also want to create things like horror movies. There's definitely a market for that. So with myself and my team, that's one of the things we're thinking about is, how do you get this amazing content in front of the right audience? Because it deserves to be seen, frankly. I think it's awesome. I think it's awesome.
Absolutely. And so, like, my content, what I try and do is I try and focus on the arts in music, in soundscapes and things of that nature, soundtracks. But I come from a bit of the engineering background. I have that kind of mind. I think of things very technically, usually, and a lot of the times people think those two ideas are opposed, and they're two different things. I don't think so at all. I think you can absolutely approach art, music, and all these pursuits that with a technical mind. So approaching music with the language of math, I think, can be very useful in some circumstances. And that's one of the things I want to try and convey with these videos, is that, like, hey, we can, it doesn't matter who you are. You can create beautiful art with whatever you've got, with whatever you're into.
I'm actually really, really glad that you brought that up. We talk about the two different sides of the brain. One of the things that we tried to do with our very first episode of the Breaking Math podcast a long time ago is talk about when mathematics is inaccessible. And I absolutely can relate. Before I became an engineer and I had to learn all the symbols, it was intimidating. Speaking of fear response, there's a lot of folks for whom, when they see mathematical symbols, it elicits a fear response and things shut down. Do you know that as a grad student in engineering, I wanted to take a material science class, and a professor said, "Oh yeah, come on in," and like, I didn't have the background to understand some things, and I just didn't have the terminologies, and I wasn't familiar with a lot of the concepts, despite my own background, which is heavy in physics and math, and I froze up, and I stuttered, and I felt like an idiot, and it was horrible, but I absolutely relate, and I've had to tell myself, it's not that we are, I'm sorry to use the phrase, dumb or stupid. It's that you got to take some time and get used to things, and then once you've processed them and really understood them and worked with them, you can really do some amazing things. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything is almost everything is a skill, right?
Yeah.
So I have basically no natural aptitude. Sorry, I have no natural aptitude for music. It's something that I've had to practice for 10 plus years of just going at it every day to get to where I'm at now, which hopefully is a competent musician. And I think the same thing goes with math too. Is so many people have the assumption that you're either good at it or you're not. No, it's a skill that you need to flex, you need to work at to be able to get good at it. And once you get good at it, then you have this beautiful language to like articulate your ideas, and you reach a fluency, whether it's math or music, where it becomes just this other fabulous mode of expression.
I actually texted you one of my millions of texts to you, and I said, what if we were to do a project where you had a holiday Hallmark movie horror film, and how would you play with the sound there? So,
right.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the things I would want to investigate is like this idea of like the acoustic startle circuit and fast sound. It's pretty well established, and it's interesting because that's something you could I would assume pretty easily model in terms of like AI, or model it inside of a computer. That's again only kind of like one dimension of sound and why something sounds scary. There's also this like idea of like the slow fear, which has much more to do with psychology and cultural associations. I'm interested because when comparing the visual to the audio how do I put that? It doesn't seem like there's as much of an immediate answer as to why something visually is scary as there is for this one part of audio science and audio research. So I'm wondering, how do you square that, I guess, with artificial intelligence, and like if you're wanting to program an AI to be able to have the same fear response as a human. Well, it seems like we can kind of do that pretty well with at least one dimension of audio, but it seems like it's a bit more of a challenge when it comes to the visual.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Actually, I think you bring up a really good point here, and my answer to that would be, I'm curious in terms of, let's just talk about a quantity, or how much information do you get visually, and how do you make decisions based on that information? I know that our eyes have multiple layers in the neural net, which we have our own net of neurons in our neocortex and in our sensory cortex. And I'm aware that there are at least some initial explanation, like one layer will identify edges. The next layer will put together some of those edges into a shape. And I don't know where movement is included, but I know that another layer identifies movement. Oh, they made a Scary Stories movie, and part of that Scary Stories movie is they messed with movement. They had a dark hallway with one of those freaky deaky creatures, and it's moving slowly, and then they stuttered the light like a strobe light and suddenly skipped it 10 steps forward. So it completely messed with your expectations of how fast or jerky things move. It was terrifying. It was very effective. Yeah. Now, I want to mention, Your channel has a multitude of videos that discuss mathematics and audio processing and music theory, and not just on fear. And I wanted, for our listeners, I wanted to do a little, I hope you don't mind, a sampler of some of the other topics in your video. You okay with that?
Sure, that sounds great.
Okay, awesome, very good.
In 1956, composer Olivier Messiaen wrote Oiseau Exotique, a piece for piano and small orchestra which is heavily inspired by birdsong. Today, fellow TikTok user So Wiley continues this tradition by producing beats from bird samples. Birds are the world's natural singers, so it seems only appropriate that we take inspiration in their song. Today, I want to take inspiration from them too, but instead of bird song or sample, I'm interested in seeing if I can make music with the geometry of bird flight patterns. Check this out, it's called a murmuration, a flock of starlings weaving intricately in and out, creating mesmerizing, highly ordered geometric patterns. This is an example of what's called emergent behavior, a system which does not depend on its individual parts, but rather on their relationships to one another. In this case, when one bird moves in any direction, its closest neighbor will adjust course to compensate, so no birds in the flock run into each other. This simple system gives way to incredibly precise geometric flock patterns. We can actually replicate this behavior in part by a simulation governed by what is called Boyd's algorithm. By assigning 3 simple rules to these simulated birds, we can shape a behavior pattern that replicates starling murmurations. Now, if we took these 3 rules and mapped them to musical parameters instead, we get some pretty interesting results. A murmuration-determined delay, a reverb impulse response controlled by bird cohesion and separation, we can even generate a melody that is controlled by the direction and turn radius of an individual bird. Let's layer a few of these concepts and see what trippy music comes as a result.
That was incredible. All of the math that I saw in that, I can go into so many directions. But before I do all that, I just want to ask you. Wow, can you? So the music was based on. It was almost like chaotic, like it was just almost chaotic sounds. Yet you turned it into a beautiful song. I mean, how was it? Was just chaos, right?
Yeah. It's chaos, and so this is a part of music that I've found a lot of inspiration in, which is sonifying sound, or sonifying data that and turning into sound. So sonification is the process of doing that, taking data, taking input, whatever it is, and turning it into sounds. You see this with like heart monitors in hospitals that beep. That sound is a sonification. It's a representation of what's going on with your heartbeat and your heart rhythm. And so the interesting thing about sonification is you have so much control over the end product and the end data. So I can take what you saw there, which is a murmuration controlled delay, or even a melody which is controlled by the individual turn radius of a single bird. And then I have so many options when it comes to turning that into a sound, because it's just 2 data points, 2, 3, 4, 5 data points. that I can make the sound come out through a piano. I can make it come out through a violin. I can change, like maybe the key, the subset of notes that we're using in a particular piece, and that we assign to different things. And you have so much control over it that you can really turn this chaos into a lot of order through music. So I find things like the sonifying the Boyd's algorithm to be an endless source of like musical inspiration, because it's just a different way to approach music. I find it very useful.
Incredible. And real quick, what dawned on me is you just mentioned something. When you made that program that kind of bounced around and made the noise, you do have a choice in what possible noises the chaos has to choose from. So that's one way that you could control the chaos a little bit. And then also the number of notes. So you could just choose like a single chord, or rather just a bunch of notes that are at least in the same key. So there's some semblance of what we, with our Western trained ears, would recognize as beautiful. And then have chaos do its thing. And like that's one way of having a combination of control and chaos, which is a huge theme in machine learning. It's like, what elements are you controlling, and where do you allow for chaos, and when do you turn that knob? When do you allow for more chaos, and when do you allow for more control? But let's do another video here.
What would happen to harmony if we use 31 notes per octave instead of 12?
Okay, that was incredible. I know that on YouTube, I've only been made aware specifically about microtonal music. For those who have never heard of microtonal and are mostly used to Western music, can you explain microtonal and what you attempted to do with this video?
Yeah, sure thing. So in the West, we are usually relegated to only 12 notes. So we have 12 individual notes that repeat in what we call octaves, and that's gives us the harmonic, diatonic, and chromatic language that we use to build out the framework for all of Western music. So we basically only have 12 notes. And this series is all about asking the question, what if we lived in an alternate universe where we had 31 notes per octave instead of 12? How would that change music, and how would that bend the fabric of harmony itself? So it's kind of this experiment where I say, okay, we have 31 notes now. Now we can, in typical Western music, you have minor chords, you have major chords. Well, now in 31, you have minor and major chords, but now you can do sub minor chords. So it's a little bit of a different feeling, different vibe, different flavor for the chords that we can, usually have. In addition to sub minor, now we have super major chords, which are great. And now we have neutral chords. So basically, by like finding the gradient of pitch spectrum that we allow ourselves to have in Western music, we have more options tonally to explore different spaces in music and find different nuance in the beauty that we allow ourselves to create.
Oh, incredible. Okay, I have a few quick questions. I realize that we are almost a bit limited on time, so we'll kind of rapid fire these pretty quick. Number one, why 31 notes instead of any other arbitrary number?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot. It seems pretty random, 31. So 31 is ideal, I would say. 12 notes is essentially a compromise. It's a system that we've created that tempers out some irregularities in the math of tuning theory. So 12 notes is fairly easy to play with. It's not too much of a you don't have too many options, but it is a compromise. So certain things are slightly out of tune. Your major chords, your minor chords, they're not as in tune as they could be. So in 31, again, we find that gradient a little bit, and so now we can get chords that are more in tune. Now you might ask, like, why 31 specifically? Why not, like, if it's all about finding that gradient, why not like 48 notes, or some multiple of 12? That would seem to make more logical sense. Look, there's I know you were looking for a quick rapid fire answer on this, but it's a little bit complex. So there's basically two or maybe three reasons why we might want to choose 31. One, it allows us to use all the same notes that we're familiar with, and have them be more in tune with each other. That's great. It allows us to go beyond the 12 notes and create these weird alien sounding harmonies, which is great. And then also, it's not too many notes that it becomes impossible to play. So like conservatory students have qualms with like practicing in all 12 of their keys. Imagine saying your teacher saying like, hey, you have to practice your scale in all 144 keys or something like that. Would be crazy. So 31 is kind of that not compromised sweet spot to where we get all the benefits of 12, plus we get to do alien stuff while not being too overwhelmed.
Cool. I have two more questions for you on this note before we'll move on this note, no pun intended. What instruments were you playing with those microtonal, or what instruments did you play for that video?
Yeah, so I mean, this harkens to one of the biggest problems in the microtonal music in the community. Is like, this stuff is great and it's really cool to explore, and it gives you an avenue to kind of take a more mathematical approach to music. But we don't have instruments to be able to play this stuff a lot of the time, because we've have hundreds and hundreds of years of developing instruments to play in 12 and to play to a certain pitch standard and all these things. So what I end up having to do is create a lot of my own instruments. So what I use is a fretless guitar. It doesn't have frets, so I can hit the notes in between the notes that we have in the West here. But I also develop and build my own instruments, like I think in that video you saw a little keyboard that I made, which is basically a modular keyboard that I can input certain notes into, and connect certain notes to each of the keys, and the keys are completely modular, so I can move them around in an order that is great for whatever tuning system I'm using. So in this case, it's going to be 31. So.
Last video. This is an amazing one. Playing a bass with a vacuum. Pull it up. Oh my gosh. Okay. All right.
I should clarify on that one. If you're wanting to try that out at home, get a vacuum that has a blow out function.
Okay.
Because blowing in won't work. You have to blow out, and you have to hit the harmonic just right so that it resonates with itself to get that sound.
So you didn't have a reed there. You just angled it so it made a vibration?
Yep. Yeah, you just angle it, and you have to be very careful, because the second you get off that, this is the second the string starts to lose resonance, and then it destabilizes with itself, and you lose the sound.
Oh, absolutely incredible. Okay, we have had Levi McLean on our show for today. There's so much more rich content. Levi is very knowledgeable about music theory. Levi is knowledgeable about culture and about how our brains process auditory information. Please check out his channel. Go to at Levi McLean. Is there an underscore there?
No, it's at Levi McLean Music.
At Levi McLean Music. You could also go to Google and just type in Levi McLean Music. His videos are entertaining. They're light. They're approachable, and they will expand your knowledge of our experience of audio processing. Please check him out. And I'm going to do my best to push this specifically to... I'm thinking about some communities to identify, and of course I'm thinking music theory, but also just science and anybody who would appreciate this. So I'll talk to my people and I'll see what we can do. Before we close, I want to give the floor completely to you to say anything you'd like to say, to ask any questions about AI or anything else, including hi mom, it doesn't matter.
Well, I have to, since you brought it up. Hi, Mom. I can't not do that. Yeah. First off, I'd just like to thank you for having me on. It's always great to have these larger discussions. And I think I said at the top of the program, one of the things I love doing is going slightly outside of my discipline. I love being put a little bit out of my comfort zone. So, like to go on here and then discuss, applications of audio and music with artificial intelligence. I think that's fantastic. I did have one question, and I'll try not to be too long-winded with it, because I think we've may have discussed this a little bit before. But
Sure.
I think it's an example that illustrates a larger question I have in terms of artificial intelligence. So, how humans process the idea of consonance and dissonance, which is essentially, do we like a sound? Do we not like a sound? I'm simplifying it a lot here, but this idea has been explained in a couple different ways. One of them being this idea of the natural law theory, which essentially looks at different sounds for their harmonic relationships and harmonic ratios between each other. So if you have two notes that create a dyad, which is a chord, the relationship between those notes, if you can express that mathematically in a simple ratio, a simple like a 3-2 or something like that, then our ear tends to classify that sound as consonant, as good sounding. Now, the more complex you get with your harmonic ratios, the more dissonant we tend to class sounds. So it's this mathematical model which explains how humans perceive this idea of consonance and dissonance. Now, it falls short in explaining anything outside of Western culture, right? So if you look at the music of Indonesian gamelan, you'll find that some of the notes, harmonic ratios between 2 or 3 or 4 notes that they use are tend to be a lot more dissonant, but they typically do not classify their own sounds as dissonant. So it's a model that works well in the West. It's a model that kind of falls short elsewhere. So my question in terms of like artificial intelligence is how, if your goal with an artificial intelligence is to say like replicate how a human understands, perceives sounds and how they understand consonance and dissonance, how can we program an artificial intelligence to do this well if we have an incomplete understanding of how we understand this really basic and fundamental concept in audio science?
All right, I will line up to bat, and I will offer my own answer, which obviously is a little bit incomplete here. First of all, machine learning has revealed more than anything, I think, that it is exclusively bound by its training data. So you just asked a question that had some specific terms here, like what a human would learn. Well, first of all, there has to be, well, what is a human? Like which humans? So that'll be based on the training data it has and how it defines human. That's its first limitation. We're not yet at a point where it can have any larger category than that. Now, my second point here is a quote from Richard Dawkins. He talked about remaining questions in evolutionary theory is what elements in evolution and in biology had to exist and what elements simply happened to exist. And that's what you're asking right now in terms of what we recognize as consonant or dissonant, what had to be and what simply happened to be, and how our values assigned. So those are two ways of looking at this question as we explore the question you brought in much further. I think that I just wanted to make those two clarifications with artificial intelligence and evolutionary theory before the broader question of what is consonant or dissonant with music styles and why. And I don't have that answer. Or I should have said I do have that answer, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm just kidding. No, I'll leave that question for our listeners to pursue, and you can try to. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that question. Either send them to Levi McLean on his socials. Again, it's at Levi McLean, or send them to our email, breakingmathpodcast@gmail.com, or on any of our socials as well. This has been an absolute blast. We've got so many more episodes and so much more content that we didn't even get to. Maybe we'll return and talk about how machine learning is now being used to attempt to classify whale language. So more on that some other time. In the meantime, we'll leave you to search that on your own. And thank you very much, Levi. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me on.